Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 48th episode of your favorite 3M channel. For today, I'm pleased to welcome Shaun back, our dear ministry partner and friend, but also even more excited to welcome for the first time our new friend and brother, Kevin. We'll be talking today about a very nerdy, but also very important aspect, not just when it comes to the mythological and fantastical aspect, but also when it comes to theological, because everything we cover on the channel, we try to see through the biblical lenses. So in that regard, I have invited two people who love Lovecraft. They have read his work. They also enjoy his work, even though Lovecraft was not a person of faith, which is perfectly fine because we are allowed to read and enjoy different things. But still, we want to analyze this through religious aspects and see how can we even enjoy more, and how can we use some of the discernment God gave us. So first, can we please start with you, Kevin? Can you please introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you come from, something from your theological background, and then Shaun. Thank you.
Sure. I am Kevin Hughes, as he said. I'm an Eastern Orthodox Christian. I live in Vancouver, Washington, and I've been podcasting for about 8 years now. I have a show about theology, and then I'm also a biblical counselor. So that's what I do when I'm not podcasting, and when I'm not doing either of those things, I'm usually hanging out with my beautiful wife Cheryl or my lovely daughter Summerlin. So that's basically me. Oh, and I have a degree from Liberty. I think you asked about the theological training. I have a degree from Liberty University, and that's about it. That's about me.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm thankful to Joshua Sherman, our mutual friend,
Yes.
who recommended you when it comes to different fringe stuff and theories. He said, "Hey, I recommend Kevin. He also has a podcast." So I watched it a little bit. I was like, "Oh, this brother is more familiar and experienced than me." So I was like, "Cool, it will be phenomenal to have him over." So yeah, welcome and thank you again.
Well, praise God, and thank you to Joshua if you're watching. I appreciate your confidence in me.
Yeah, Shaun, brother, welcome back. How about you? Can you please share something
Yeah,
about your?
yeah, it's good to be back. I'm I'm Shaun. I am a garbage truck driver. Um, don't really have any theological training, but I've been a Christian now for about 6 years. And before I was a Christian, I was involved in the occult, and so a lot of what I know about Lovecraft came from that end. Um, Lovecraft is, obviously mentioned in the book The Satanic Rituals, and is it's definitely a source for people who are involved in chaos magic. So, like, it's a really strong, cohesive system that allows them to kind of leave their paradigm. Um, yeah, I attend a Reformed Baptist church, and I'm just a guy who loves Jesus and loves fiction, and I'm glad I can help.
Awesome. I always try to make this diversity combo on the channel. It's filled with Orthodox and Protestant folks. And I always say it's not like the door is closed for Catholics, but somehow I never bumped into them. And I did try to invite a couple of bishops who are like dealing with the occult, against the occultic stuff, and they're exorcists and stuff, but they somehow always keep being busy or something happens. So I guess I'm just gonna have to be more persistent. Okay, guys, when it comes to the Howard Phillips Lovecraft, what can we say about him? Some basic stuff when it comes to his childhood. How did he grow up? I just want to speak a little bit about his past, so we can see was there any context, any inspiration that write him in a way that he did write.
Well, I I know a little bit about Lovecraft's childhood, that he didn't have a super good relationship with his parents. Really, a lot of bizarre things in his childhood. Not bizarre like the things in his writings, of course, but bizarre just in the sense of, like, he didn't have a very traditional upbringing. He was actually, when he was really, really young, he was in kind of the upper class of society, but then his parents, or his mother in particular, had lost all of their wealth at some point. And maybe Shaun knows more of the story behind that, but I know that they lost their wealth, and he really kind of had this angst about life, and it seems from some of his letters and things that the loss of his family's wealth and the fact that he always sort of perceived himself as being worth more than what his actual station in life was maybe afforded, made him really have a strong sense of nihilism, and he was very strongly attracted to the nihilist worldview. For those who don't know, nihilism is the system of philosophy created by Nietzsche. And basically, the system of nihilism comes down to the idea that there really is no hope. There really is nothing to look forward to. There's no joy, or at least if there is any joy, it's just meaningless anyway. And your life is meaningless, and everything is meaningless, and you should just come to terms with that. And Lovecraft got really into that kind of worldview. So Shaun, if you want to fill in some of the gaps because now I'm getting into more of his adult life. So we're in his childhood. So if you want to fill in some of the gaps and where that is.
Yeah, you're exactly right. He grew up in his younger childhood. He was definitely high society. His mother came from a higher class family, and his father was a traveling salesman, so he made a lot of money. And when he was 3 years old, his father, who had had syphilis for some time, ended up having an episode of, I think it was insanity. And so he ended up going to a mental institution and was institutionalized for 5 years. During that time, they didn't have any money. So when his dad went away, that was the last time that Lovecraft ever saw his father. He moved in with his grandfather on his mother's side, and he was a very wealthy, well-to-do gentleman. And he ended up 10 years later having a stroke and died the day after. And that was the moment that really broke his mother. So he had this loss of a father very early on. He wasn't dead, but he was just gone. They didn't talk about him. So I can imagine that would really impact somebody's psyche, knowing that your father's out there somewhere, but he doesn't know where you are, and he may not even care. He might be insane. And I know that kind of fostered a continued fear for Lovecraft of slipping into insanity. And the death of his grandfather was very impactful on both him and his mother, and it strained their relationship. But I'll let you go on towards his adult life.
Okay. So I appreciate you filling in a lot of those gaps. So as far as his adult life, once he got into the ideals of Nietzsche and that kind of existentialism, he actually... I had an interview on my show a while ago in which we said that Lovecraft was actually a more faithful son of Nietzsche in a lot of ways than most of the actual existentialist philosophers would turn out to be, because Nietzsche's famous quote is, "God is dead and we have killed him." And people generally use that quote in a very sort of triumphalistic way. God is dead, and now we're free, and all of this. But if you actually read the context of that quote, Nietzsche is speaking from a place of abject horror. He is saying God is dead, and we've killed him, and this is the worst thing that ever could have happened to humanity, because now we know that we are meaningless. The cosmos is meaningless. We will probably go extinct someday. and it will never have meant anything. Nothing we do will. And unlike a lot of other existentialist philosophers who would kind of take that worldview and say, so you make your own meaning and it, it works out okay. Lovecraft actually internalized this, and I think in a lot of ways gets it right, because he says, well, if the world is that hopeless, then that's terrifying. And so he creates a system of fictional literature in which that existentialist worldview is lived out. And I think I don't know enough about the Reformed Baptist worldview, so Shaun might have some things to say about it. But what I love about H.P. Lovecraft is, from an Orthodox perspective, H.P. Lovecraft's worldview is like the complete antithesis of the Orthodox phronema. It's like if you so if Fyodor Dostoevsky is orthodoxy being lived out in a fictional world, then H.P. Lovecraft is essentially existentialism, and the exact opposite of an orthodox worldview being experienced in fiction. And so as we see I think the philosophy of Lovecraft is perhaps the most important thing that we'll be examining today. And yes, we'll have to kind of pick it apart to a certain degree from a Christian perspective, but I don't want that to cause us to lose sight of the importance of his philosophy and how that existentialist philosophy is, to a greater or lesser extent, the default worldview of the academic culture in which we live. So reading Lovecraft is truly an awesome exercise for any Christian, especially if you're going to do apologetics or theology, because it's such a great way to approach the worldview that dominates our culture. And when you can compare some of the themes in Lovecraft to the themes in Christianity, I think you can really break into the culture. But we're going to be talking about that the whole interview. So I guess to round out Lovecraft's experience, his life, he would end up dying alone. He actually died from a form of stomach cancer, if I'm not mistaken. And fascinatingly enough, he would refer to it as his consumption. And in a lot of his letters, he would write these fascinating letters about just describing the progression of his illness and how he sort of, by the end of his life, he came to see himself as one of the characters in his story, experiencing this kind of body horror that he himself wrote about. And I guess there's one other thing that we probably have to address given the day and time in which we live. Yes, H.P. Lovecraft was a racist, and I don't just mean, sometimes we talk about historical figures and it's like, well, he was a man of his time. H.P. Lovecraft was actually a racist, even according to his contemporaries. One of his stories is even the story of a person who goes insane because he basically discovers that he has African heritage and can't handle that. So, yes, H.P. Lovecraft's worldview was terrible, and it led him to a really dark view of humanity. And this is going to make some people uncomfortable, but I actually think that that's also part of the reason why his writings are so magnificently good, because if you can imagine what it would be like to be constantly living in fear of everyone around you and everything around you, and have this utter terror of the world around you. Like, for me, if I have a neighbor who's from another country, then I'm inviting them over for dinner. We're exchanging recipes. I'm fascinated by learning about their culture. For someone like H.P. Lovecraft, if he has a neighbor from another country, he sees them as a terrifying threat to his existence. And so if you put yourself in his worldview for a moment and tie in the fact that he's an existentialist who believes that nothing has any meaning, and then put him in this world that's rapidly changing and becoming more of a global community than it ever was in the past, and you get a recipe for, and then the fact that he is brilliant, whether he was correct in his worldview or not, he was brilliant and he was an excellent writer, and it turns into a recipe for just some of the greatest works of fiction within the horror genre, at least, that have ever been written. And I think a lot of that is because he had his own internal world was a terrifying place to live. And so it makes sense that the world he creates is a terrifying place to live. So, Shaun, I don't know if you want to fill in some gaps again. It sounds like you have a lot more knowledge of Lovecraft the man.
So one thing that I would say is, without detracting at all from anything that you said, and I agree that he was racist, but I've kind of come to this area where I don't think that it was a moral failure for him to be a racist. I think it was just him being consistent with his worldview. I mean, if you are a materialist, you would realize that coyotes and wolves don't run in the same pack. And so for him to be a racist is just to say, well, there's no inherent dignity of man, and we are all just creatures in this vast universe where everything is trying to kill us. And this person who happens to be a different shade of brown than me is a threat to my life. And so I don't see it as he's an all around good person and this is just a moral defect. I just see it as him being consistent
Absolutely.
with Nietzsche's system. And I'm really glad that you brought up that about Nietzsche, because I was actually thinking about that earlier today, reflecting on, the way that he subjects in his stories the white Christian population. Always they're the good guys, but they're like the naive good guys. So he takes ethics and the virtues of goodness, truth, and beauty that he identifies as being good and positive, and he subjects that to primitive forces of cosmic horror. And so that's kind of Nietzsche's whole thing about might makes right, and power is what allows us to dictate the social and political changes. That's completely present in Lovecraft. And just like Nietzsche did, he's apologizing for it, in that he's showing how good that this Western system is, and yet they're the victims. But yeah, as an adult, he dealt with a lot of things. He was he had I think we would probably call it a phobia now. He didn't really like people. In fact, when he was dying of cancer, it wasn't until I think it was 5 days before he died that he actually checked himself into a hospital. And by that time he was just so far gone. But as you were saying that he saw himself as a monster, I'm thinking of that of Wilbur from the Dunwich horror.
Yes.
You've got tentacles, tuberous tentacles growing from all over his midsection. I'm just thinking, wow, his stomach, his intestines must have looked like tumorous tentacles.
Mm-hmm.
And so, God is sovereign, and he has a sense of humor. If you're going to spend your whole life slapping God in the face, you're going to get what you get.
Yeah, I was when I was researching for the topic, I came up with this. Well, I didn't come up. I just found this word, this expression that I never heard of before. That Lovecraft's philosophies was called "quote unquote" cosmicism, which is basically describing this kind of cosmic insignificance. And once when we realized that in his writings, knowing the context of his miserable childhood and lifestyle, you understand why was he writing in the way he was writing. And by the way, I have to say, learning more about his life makes me doesn't make me happy he had cancer, doesn't make me happy he died in agony. It just makes me feel sad for him, because it wasn't his fault what happened to his
Right.
family, to his parents, because that drove him to loneliness, depression, dark places, insanity, and drove him to use the God-given gift to think and to write. And instead of using that as something beautiful, he used it to write about this hopeless universe where you're insignificant. No one cares about you. It's even worse than God of Deism. At least with God of Deism, there was God who created you. He abandoned you, unfortunately, which sucks also. And it's not true. But in his lifestyle, there was not even God. It's just this, you're cosmically insignificant. Like, you are as important as I don't know, a dust on your table. That's it. There's no meaning in anything. So my heart just feels sad for him, even though he died, and lived long ago. But I have to connect his childhood with his type of writing, because I tell my non-Christian friends, hey, when you read Tolkien, when you read C.S. Lewis, when you read Brandon Sanderson, you think just because you're not a religious person and you're just reading fiction. But let me tell you, all of these authors, they're inevitably led by their own experiences, beliefs, or lack of beliefs, the way how they grew up, schools, friends, everything. It's inevitable that in some shape or form you will portray that in your writings. Or if you're a sculptor or a painter, that's you can't escape from who you are and what is in your heart. That will show up eventually in some shape or form. So I just want to say that I'm not surprised the way he was writing, because he just felt unloved, and everything was hopeless and dark for him. When it comes to his most well-known character in novels, and Kevin, we can again start with you. Can you please tell us which is the most famous character that Lovecraft invented? That even though we have some kind of cosmic fear of him, but we also, for some weird reason, we love this creature.
Well, his most famous creation was probably Cthulhu, which, by the way, some people I already know are going to be in your comment section like, no, it's pronounced this other way. Lovecraft himself definitively said that it doesn't matter how you pronounce the name Cthulhu, because it was never intended to be pronounced by the human tongue. So, checkmate, purists. But, so Cthulhu is his most famous creation, although depictions of Cthulhu almost always get him wrong. If you actually read the book, The Call of Cthulhu, spoiler alert, when you get to the end of the book, Lovecraft gives a very brief description of Cthulhu, and in that description, he's this huge, fat, bulbous sea monster thing that doesn't really have any hands, just kind of reaches around with tentacles, is semi-blind, and ends up just flopping into the sea, to the horror of everyone, because now he's unleashed upon the cosmos. But depictions of him by modern people always have him like ripped and that's totally not what Lovecraft envisioned. He was disgusting to look at, and I want to say that the reason why I'm keying in on that is because you just made a really excellent point. We do this thing where we recognize the intense terror of this great work of fiction. It really is an excellent book. It's actually it's not just one of the first cosmic horror books. It's also one of, not the first, but a very early example of taking detective fiction and turning it into horror. So brilliant use of different genres, brilliant. The story unfolds in a very brilliant way. He uses newspaper clippings, and this was not the way books were typically done back then. He's drawing very heavily on other great authors like Bram Stoker, but the difference is that he's as he's drawing on that, he's also taking away, when you read Bram Stoker liked to inject a lot of humor and goofiness and over-the-topness to his stories to make them a bit more palpable. H.P. Lovecraft doesn't do that. He wants you to be drawn into the story, but he also wants the full force of the terror to sink in, and he wants this creature that you're encountering, Cthulhu, to be so horrendous that when you whenever one of the characters in the story sees him, they actually go insane. Even just seeing Cthulhu sends you into complete insanity. So, which is why he gives such a brief description. I mentioned the description was brief. That's intentional. He doesn't want you to have a good visual of what Cthulhu looks like, because it's so much better if you have to imagine for yourself what Cthulhu looks like. But what he does give us is everything that revolts every person. Every person would rather see something ripped and muscular and lean and strong than see something fat and tumorous and slimy and bulbous and unpleasant to look at. And so I think that the very fact that we misrepresent Cthulhu in art shows how good that book really is, because we hate what Lovecraft created so much that we pacify ourselves by creating something similar but different enough that it doesn't scare us quite so much. And Lovecraft didn't do that for us. Lovecraft gives us this terrifying, disgusting thing. And then the reason why I think Cthulhu resonates with people on a different level, though, is because a lot of the other entities that are actually more powerful in the Cthulhu mythos are so far beyond us that we can't really even comprehend them. So like Yog-Sothoth, the father of Cthulhu, is an entity that is described in very godlike terms. He's all-powerful, all-knowing, or the blind idiot god. Azathoth is seen as this just sort of dreamer. He's just dreaming up the cosmos, and someday he'll probably wake up and everything will disappear. But he doesn't have any conception that we are real, so he couldn't care less about us. And just all of these entities. But what makes Cthulhu stand out is that Cthulhu is actually the high priest of this system. So there's a podcast, and I don't know if either of you two listen to it, but it's called Christ and Cthulhu. And it's this awesome podcast all about taking H.P. Lovecraft and analyzing it from a Christian perspective. And he analyzes all these different books. And in that podcast, he says that Cthulhu is actually the Christ of H.P. Lovecraft's universe. He is the priest that sort of is the go-between between us and these entities that are so far beyond us that it's scary just to think about them. And so it's actually really fitting that Cthulhu is the most famous artifact of Lovecraft's mythology, because Cthulhu is, in some sense, the closest thing to one of Lovecraft's gods that we could actually interact with. But the problem with that is that because of that, Cthulhu is also the entity that really enjoys sowing madness into people's minds, turning them into animals. And in the end of Call of Cthulhu, everybody knows the first line from Call of Cthulhu, where he says that it is a merciful thing that human beings aren't able to bring together all of our knowledge. But fewer people know the last line of Call of Cthulhu, which is actually an eschatology. And in it, he says, we had not defeated Cthulhu, we had only delayed the inevitable, because one day the stars would align again and the world would be bathed in a sea of debauchery and madness. So in the end, there's going to be, in Lovecraft's mythology, a second coming of the Cthulhu, that basically, like we have a second coming of Christ, they have a second coming of Cthulhu, but the difference is that Jesus Christ reshapes us into the image of God so that we become what human beings were originally meant to become. We were originally meant to be. We are united with God and we become more and more human. But for Cthulhu, he does not care about our humanness, and he sows in debauchery and turns us more and more animalistic, so that at the, we might say, second coming of Cthulhu, human beings lose all humanity and become no different than the grotesque creatures all around us that just live for their passions. So I find it very fascinating that Cthulhu is quite literally an antichrist. He is the complete antithesis of what Jesus Christ is. Jesus Christ is God become man so that we can be united with God. Cthulhu is an entity that is far beyond us and theoretically goes between us and these higher entities, but does not care about us or love us or have any goodwill towards us, but merely wills our destruction through a long series of well thought out institutions of complete madness. So that's kind of where I would go with that. Shaun, I have been talking for a very long time, so if you want to take it away, you are more than welcome.
Well, so one of the things I got out of that was that Chibi Cthulhu is a more accurate depiction of Cthulhu than...
Yes.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. The ripped Cthulhu, that's totally not a thing. And in fact, his body is so membranous. It's just one big pustule that when they ram the ship into it, it breaks open like bladders, and there's this ick that's just going everywhere, and it's this black toxic gas. Yeah. And you're absolutely right when you're talking about Cthulhu as the Christ. Unfortunately, Lovecraft, I think, was a Nestorian, because you already have a trinity of outer gods with Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, and Nyarlathotep. And Nyarlathotep, I kind of always thought of as that being the Christ figure, because he's kind of the face of the Trinity. Whereas Yog-Sothoth, definitely the Holy Spirit. He is the gate. He is the key.
Right.
And but then you have Cthulhu, and it's interesting because the elder gods are the ones that supposedly imprisoned Cthulhu, depending on which of the readers and which canon you're going to go with. But the elder gods imprisoned Cthulhu, whereas Christ beat the elder gods. They beat Cthulhu. Christ came from the heavens. Cthulhu also came from the heavens, but instead of returning to the heavens, he was imprisoned in the abyss. So that it kind of is like a descent into Hades and then an ascension, but he hasn't been allowed to ascend. So it's kind of like that stepping on Christ thing. And when he turns his followers and the goal is that these things become like bestial, I kind of can see somebody who's coming from a very, liberal, progressive background saying, yeah, Christian becomes sheep, like they go crazy, all baptized and stuff, and so there's this element where his fear of other people was actually coming out through his myths. Like, yeah, these Christians are crazy people. Look what they're doing. And I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it definitely bled through. And so, yeah,
well, it's not just Christianity so he's expressing his fear also, because when you read Call of Cthulhu, he does have an actual religion around Cthulhu, and the description of that religion is really similar to a lot of shamanistic pagan kind of religions. So he's very much exposing, once again, his fear of kind of people other than, because you're right, he does look down on Christians, but he's not really afraid of Christians when he writes about Christians. And, this is going to be a little bit demeaning towards us, but he writes about Christians. He basically, not in Call of Cthulhu, but in other books, he talks about Christians being really lucky because they're so stupid that they don't know how insignificant they are, which means that they can just kind of live their lives in this, way that's just like they get to just live life and enjoy it. Whereas the people who know about all this terrible stuff, like the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazrat, they go insane because they know the truth, and the truth is terrifying. So anyway, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No. And I wonder if when you're reading the Call of Cthulhu, because the last time I read through it, when there was that relief, the clay tablet relief of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
And it's describing him sitting with his claws on this pedestal and his wings touching the edge of the relief. Did you think of the Ark of the Covenant there and how it's like a backward symbol of the Ark of the Covenant? Instead of two, you have one, and one set of wings touching the edge. Yeah,
yes.
Dude, that's. I mean, Lovecraft was a genius.
He was. It's a backwards Ark of the Covenant. It's also it's also like a very much sort of perversion of the concept of the icon. It's a perversion of the concept of the Ark as being where God meets with man. So the relief is kind of this thing that Cthulhu can sort of interact with us through, but it's not clear why you would want to interact with this entity. That you're spot on. That's exactly what he was going for, is that it's a complete reversal of the Ark. And it also it brings Cthulhu into relationship with real world sort of pagan shamanistic practices, because Lovecraft, one thing that he does that's really brilliant, and he is one of the first horror writers to really do a great job of this, and I can't speak highly enough of the brilliance of it, is he really grounds these things in the real world. He connects them to things that happen in real life, so that when you're reading about this, I can't comprehend what Cthulhu is, but I can comprehend what my weirdo neighbor does in his backyard once a year. And then Lovecraft makes that terrifying. So it's like, wait, now my neighbor isn't just some oddball or, just coming from a different culture. Now my neighbor is connected to this entity. And I actually think, to be fair to Lovecraft, there's a sense in which there's some truth to that, right? Pagan religions aren't just worshiping entities that they made up. They're worshiping demons. Yeah. So the things that they're uniting themselves to are actually really terrifying. And it actually is bad that people are doing this. But Lovecraft's response to that is not my response to that. My response to it is, you've been enslaved by demons, come be set free by the Lord Jesus Christ. Whereas Lovecraft's response to it is basically like, hey, maybe they're on to something, because maybe the Christian God isn't all that great, and all these demons, they can actually give you what you want, which is to be a beast. Anyway, that's another. I love his bas relief stuff. So I'm so glad you brought that up. He has another story as well where there's this bas relief that one of the characters actually finds, and he realizes that this relief is depicting something so horrifying that the more he contemplates it, the more insane he becomes, until eventually it's like eventually it like destroys his mind. But then the reality is that that's because what he's seeing is the truth. It's like, this is the reality. Lovecraft does a great job instituting these sort of intuiting these sort of reliefs that appear throughout his world and connect us to these elder gods that we should not be interacting with, and these creatures that are just horrifying for us. So I'm so glad you brought that up. But yeah, that is exactly what he's going for. It's like this false image of Christ and this false Ark of the Covenant and this false icon, or I should say opposite, because I guess in his mythology it's not false, right? That is the truth in his mythology.
So if I can follow that train of thought, where we have these, these icons that are, to them, you have the touch points for insanity. For Christianity, with icons, you have touch points or windows for spirituality to come to you. The windows into heaven, and this idea of his insanity would be like our idea of conversion, where you hit this point and you can't return, and you can't see it for what it is. It's you're exposed to the truth. And I'm kind of reminded of, like this, Dante was doing this in the Dante's Inferno, where your eyes can't actually look up to God. You have to look to the good and follow the good to God. And it's kind of that way with Lovecraft as he's doing this. He's not going to show you exactly what these outer gods are, but he's going to describe these other things that will lead you to concluding how terrible they are. And so I'm going to take that, and because you're Orthodox, I know you'll appreciate this. Cthulhu's mother, Shub-Niggurath, she actually bestows upon her worshippers something called mother's milk, which then turns them into the little chthonic beings, or little Cthulhus. So as like a Virgin Mary figure of directing them to her son, and then turning them into imagers of her son. It's like, dude, Lovecraft knew what was going on.
Yeah, definitely. And it's fascinating to me, though, that it's like he's sort of reminds me, well, you were into the occult, so I feel like you'll kind of appreciate this reference, but it's like Luciferians versus Satanists. It's like Satanists are really just these goofballs who, by and large, who just think that like they just hate Christianity, so they want to make fun of it. But Luciferians, they actually are in some ways the ones who have the truth and reject it. It's like they know that Christianity is true. They know that the gospel is true, and they just don't want anything to do with it. So they make an anti-gospel. And that's exactly what Lovecraft is doing in his mythology. It's like, except he doesn't know that it's true. He's rejecting it, but he's rejecting it in such a way that it's like he can't help himself but create everything that he's rejecting, he's creating, but bastardizing it and turning it into something horrifying. So you're absolutely right. It's like, this is the Virgin Mary, but Lovecraft doesn't see the Virgin Mary as your benevolent, kind, good mother of our Lord Jesus Christ, who's going to bestow the gift of her son. No, she's this horrifying monster who you pray to, and she turns you into just another little demon thing.
Well, and even so Revelation 12, where it's discussing the woman who is, that's Mary. So it's discussing a woman who is the mother of the church, mother of all those, basically the mother of the church, who goes off into the wilderness. And the name for Shub-Niggurath is Black Goat of the Wood with 1,000 young. Yeah, you're just pitting this idea of the All Mother, and yeah, that's exactly what he's going on.
Yeah. Do you think that he got the goat imagery from the occult? Because I know that a lot of occult circles use the goat imagery, or do you think that he just thought that was a super cool, creepy image?
I think that he's probably playing more with like I guess it would depend on like what all qualifies as the occult. So like if you're gonna do like Jewish ideas, then yeah, I would say that he definitely got it from that. But like yeah, the Western idea for the goat that's really recent. It's based on Middle Eastern concepts of the goat of Azazel.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think in some ways he's kind of which I mean he lived in New York, so he lived around Jewish people, and he was married to a Jewish woman, even though he was an anti-Semite, so he had this complicated racism, but yeah, I think that he was kind of one of the ones to bring this goat figure into this horror genre and put it in competition with God. And he even I remember Wilbur out of the Dunwich horror. He keeps describing him as having goatish features.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
he's
always
like,
thought that was fascinating.
yeah.
I've always loved the Dunwich horror because I've always actually that's something too that I think Lovecraft does really well is he gives you these sort of build-ups. So it's like the Dunwich horror is one of my favorite where he just it's like you don't see what Wilbur is until really close to the end, but by the time you see it, you're already terrified. Like he doesn't have to show you. And I think that's why so many Lovecraft movies have not been very good because Hollywood doesn't understand how to make us afraid without the visuals. So it's and it's harder too, you know, they can't like give you this long description of how eerie something is. So they have to somehow show it to you visually. But I don't know, very few of them have done a good job. But you're absolutely right. The Dunwich horror is so awesome. I love the way that he just like sort of becomes more and more goat-like, and then he's got tentacles, and yeah.
I don't think Hollywood trusts its viewers very much because they don't really trust us to come to the right concept.
Right.
You know, so we're not allowed to have imaginative fear. They don't trust us to find that a woman is beautiful unless she takes her clothes off.
Right.
Hollywood is just all about throwing stuff in your face that we didn't ask for.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I like that. I never thought about that before, that it's about trusting the audience because Lovecraft is smart enough to know that it really doesn't matter if you see the creature the way he sees it. What matters is that you're terrified of it. So he gives you just enough details for you to be afraid and then sort of lets you fill in the blanks so that you can terrify yourself. Whereas Hollywood is more like, we want them to know exactly what our vision and so they ruin it.
Absolutely. And in fact, to that point, you know, he gave Arthur Derleth and August Derleth and Robert Howard the go ahead to start building the Arkham universe and having characters interact with his world. He wasn't like safeguarding this like, hey, this is
right.
the canon. He had enough trust in people who loved his work to be loyal and faithful to his to this the mind of this universe. Whether or not they were faithful to it, that's another question. But yeah,
right.
he definitely saw this as art and trusted the audience to come up with the meaning.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Joe, man, I'm so thankful I can listen to you the whole day, and there is like part in my mind that is like that loves gathering information, just like chipmunks and squirrels. They like gathering nuts and just putting all here. Like my shelves are full. Like, and I have books elsewhere also. So like that's how I like compiling books and knowledge. So I can listen all day because, and also I'm now inspired to go and and actually buy some of some of Lovecraft's books and start reading, because I can't wait to start seeing these things for myself more, just like you can. So I just want to add more on some of the stuff that you said. Um, Analyzing his world and listening and reading the scholars, and this is the main the I will post the book link, Amazon link, in the video's description. um, Reading from the scholars, they agreed that Lovecraft's universe changed over time. Just like Kevin said in the beginning, Cthulhu wasn't always seen like some cosmic entity, huge, with muscles that were like gonna, just kill you instantly. He was different. So when I was reading the scholars, they say, well, yeah, like every mythos in the beginning is developing, it's evolving, so eventually became something more. So then in the beginning, maybe it was like a cosmic deity, then it was something more like an alien, but not really God, even though people in Lovecraft's novels would make a cult out of Cthulhu and worship him. So there's all this evolution of Cthulhu. But when it comes to what inspired Lovecraft to create particularly Cthulhu, I think that we can agree, based on what you said, based on what I was researching, that Cthulhu was an expression of this cosmicism, where basically what you guys said, like you as an individual, you as a human being, you don't matter, right? So there's this fear, not just of the dark, but there's fear like what lies in the dark. There's this fear of the unknown, but it's not baseless fear. There's fear like you subconsciously know that there is something and it doesn't like you. You're basically just a food, like a meat. You're just a product to serve this, which reminds me, when I'm digging into ancient mythologies of the Sumerians, Babylonians, all these ancient people, like their gods created people to serve them. And like if there was a noise coming from earth, coming from the earth, these guys want to come and just kill humankind. So I'm not saying that there's correlation, but I'm just saying that in the same way humans were not related and seen as something special, like Lovecraft didn't see them either.
Mm-hmm.
It's completely opposite in the Bible. Well, no, you're highly esteemed because God made you and he knows you personally, and he doesn't want any doom or gloom in your life. I mean, yes, we will go through tribulations and suffering. I'm not one of those Christians who just want to preach prosperity, health, and wealth to people. I think that's a delusion. But still, God loves you even in your darkest places. And there's no such hope in Lovecraft's universe, especially when it comes to Cthulhu. I just want to read some of the stuff that I found. Yeah, so Lovecraft was also influenced by this poem that came in 1830, which was called The Kraken. I don't have time to read all from my notes. He was also inspired by the Arabian Nights, Zoroastrian theology, the fictional authors such as Blackwood, H.G. Wells, Edgar Allan Poe, and others. And I'm going to start read some quotations from this book. Okay, so when it comes to Colavito,
really quick, I had a question for you. You said he was influenced by Zoroastrian theology, and I've read some Zoroastrian theology, but I'm struggling to make the connection between Lovecraft and the Zoroastrian theology. Would you mind elaborating a little bit before you read what you're about to?
I didn't read Zoroastrian theology. This is just, what I'm drawing from sources. So
okay, sorry.
When I read more, I can send you like a personal message. Yes.
Absolutely. Sorry about that. I just was curious as to that.
Yeah, it's okay. So Colavito was recommended to me by some Christians, and also late Dr. Michael Heiser, who was teaching on the Divine Council and stuff like that. He was also reading this scholar who doesn't seem to be a Christian, but it's not anti-Christian. He's just trying to dissect many conspiracy theories, and including works of fiction, but also aliens and stuff like that, by providing historical data and evidence. So in one of the pages, which is 15 to 17, he says the most important early writer to propose extraterrestrial visitation on Earth was Adam Helena Blavatsky, who lived from middle to the late 19th century, the founder of Theosophy. Blavatsky's disciple, W. Scott Elliot, expanded on hints in the theosophical cosmos by creating a race of divine beings inhabiting Venus. In 1919, the great collector of anomalous trivia, Charles Fort. And that's funny because we mentioned Charles Fort in a few episodes ago when I had an episode on Mothman. He published the Book of the Damned, in which he speculated that old stories of demons could be related to undesirable visitors from other worlds, though he did not draw a firm connection between devils and aliens. He also suggested the other worlds may have communicated with ours in the distant past, left behind advanced technology, or attempted to colonize the Earth. H.P. Lovecraft read both the Book of the Damned and Scott Eliot's compilation volume, which is called The Story of Atlantis and Lost Lemuria, came in 1925. And from these fragmentary ideas about prehistoric extraterrestrial visitation, he imagined more or less these flesh and blood aliens arriving on Earth in the distant past and all that this implied. Again, don't worry about, I have even page numbers, but I don't have to mention this. I will just post the Amazon link if you want to buy the book and support the author and read more for yourself. He also said, again, Colavito on another page, that the prophesied return of Cthulhu resembles Revelation, which you guys just mentioned recently, that Lovecraft, even though I don't know if people know this, but he was an atheist, but even as an atheist, he was still reading the Bible, so he knew the material, which you gentlemen just mentioned in numerous examples, how he was paralleling the Bible, but in a dark way. I also want to say that how Cthulhu reminds me of Dark Messiah. So he's Messiah in a way, but he's Dark Messiah because the way he's influencing and converting people, again, they're just flesh and meat. They have no significance. So the prophesied return of Cthulhu resembles Revelation and Ragnarok because Lovecraft was biblically literate and used the biblical narrative as a base in order to subvert it. Another sources that Lovecraft had for his writing was a combo of dreams, nightmares, and his early experience being exposed to insanity in his family. He even recalled having dreams where these strange winged creatures picked him up and flew with him in a strange land. So I would just like you gentlemen, you can take as much as you want time. When it comes to all these sources, like some of the fictional authors, some of the stuff when it comes to aliens or like biblical sources, Ragnarok, when it comes to this poem coming from the early 18th century, the Kraken, some relation material with Madame Blavatsky, who's the founder of Notorious Theosophy. I would just like you to expound a little bit when it comes to these sources which he had as inspiration when he started writing his universe.
Well, Shaun probably actually knows more about some of that stuff than I do, given his background. I do know, like, Madame Blavatsky. I've studied a little bit of her stuff, mostly because of the fact that I am fascinated by the level at which... so I used to be an assistant pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist false religion, and by God's grace, I was let out of that. But one thing that has fascinated me because of that experience is how much correlation and overlap there really is between all of the various false prophets from that time period, and even shortly thereafter. So whether it's Emanuel Swedenborg or Madame Blavatsky or Ellen G. White, all of these various false teachers are claiming that there are these entities living on other planets. In Ellen G. White's case, it was Jupiter, and I forget what other planets she said. In Madame Blavatsky's case, it's Venus. But in whatever situation they are, they're all saying that there's these aliens and that these aliens are either... in Ellen G. White's case, the aliens were actually good. They were these unfallen beings, and we should be so lucky that they would come and visit us. But in most of these things, we see these entities claiming to be extraterrestrials being very negative encounters. There's actually, right now, I saw a lecture about this. There's a semi-prominent occultist who he's really into ufology. not an occultist in the traditional sense, because he doesn't believe in the spiritual realm. He believes in purely physical existence, but he is an occultist in the sense that he really is into talking about UFOs. He would be an ancient aliens person. He believes that all stories of gods, demons, angels, it's all aliens. And he said something really fascinating. He said that he actually does believe that all of the stories of demonic possession and demonic visitation and demonic, false dreams and all of these terrible things are caused by alien visitors. But he says, despite the fact that it might make you really uncomfortable, they don't seem like it, but they're actually benevolent. So what you should do is just go with the flow. Go with the flow of the experience. So to your point, it's like, I do think that, and by the way, I 100% believe that aliens are demons. I don't believe that there are extraterrestrials. I believe that they are demonic entities parading themselves as they always have. There's lots of evidence of this. I've talked about it some on my channel, but a really awesome book that covers it is Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future by Father Seraphim Rose. Awesome book, and he quotes a lot of different sources as well. And there are some other books too that cover it from a less mystical angle, like Extraterrestrials and Christianity is a book by a Catholic woman who's a scholar, and she basically explains why the idea of extraterrestrials makes no sense. And so there's lots of good books out there that you can read, but I guess my point is that I do see a lot of connection between these things, and I think that not only is Lovecraft drawing on that stuff, but I think Lovecraft is actually drawing, weirdly, the correct conclusions. It's just that because he's coming from an atheistic worldview, he doesn't have the ability to come up with the right response. So when I say he's coming up with the correct conclusions, I think he does recognize, like, man, these stories are really negative and really disturbing. And then he says, but if there's any truth behind, any given religion, it probably is something really grotesque and disturbing. So that's the framework he writes from. Whereas, Shaun and I read those same sources and we're like, wow, this looks really grotesque and disturbing. Thank God that our Lord Jesus Christ has delivered us from these horrible entities. So, anyway, yeah, take it away, Shaun. I'm sure you have lots of good things to respond.
Well, yeah. So, Madam Helena Blavatsky, she started the Theosophy. She wrote stuff like The Secret Doctrine. She influenced people like Mary Baker Eddy, Phineas Quimby, who then went on to influence people that through direct or indirect influence was responsible for Jim Jones. So you've got a lot of badness coming from that whole area. Anytime that you say, hey, I've got contact with these other things and my evidence is, bro, trust me, that's not cool. So yeah, and there was a lot of cultists, not just occultists, but cultists that came out of that time. You had Joseph Smith coming out 1830s, and that whole mid 19th century had issues. And then being influenced by other horror writers, I can definitely see the influence of Lovecraft. Even fantasy like Lemuria, you can see that in something like The Mountains of Madness, where he like directly says, yeah, the stories about Atlantis and stuff that happened here, which is really cool and really creepy too. The Mountains of Madness is
that book is
crazy
awesome.
story. Yeah, it's a crazy story. He is the work that he was influenced by. He captured all of these different ideas, and then he went on to influence people like Stephen King, and there's just some of the greatest authors that we have for horror fiction. They all kind of look to Lovecraft as like he was the godfather of horror, probably second only to Edgar Allan Poe.
Definitely. Talking about where Lovecraft has influenced other people, that list is just, that goes on and on. I mean, the movie Alien, I know in your show notes you mentioned the movie Alien. Even Godzilla, actually. Everybody talks about my Godzilla shirts because I love Godzilla, but Godzilla was actually a cosmic horror entity. And if you read the original script for Project G, which is the first draft of the Godzilla movie, he's actually not a lizard from the sea. He's a giant octopus that just sort of, because it was supposed to be a claymation movie, actually. So it was going to be this big clay octopus, but then they decided that was going to be too expensive. And so they decided to make him sort of like a radioactive dinosaur. But then as a result, he also became a lot more sympathetic too. So a lot of the Lovecraftian elements get lost in that, but they're still there, especially in the original movie or the new movie that just came out, Godzilla -1. Tons of the Lovecraftian imagery has come back into that movie, because in Godzilla -1, Godzilla is intentionally like terrifying and indestructible and just a force of nature, and all kinds of mythologies science fiction and fantasy, like you said, have really drawn heavily on Lovecraft. Stephen King is such an excellent example, and he has a book of short stories called Nightmares and Dreamscapes, and in that book, Stephen King actually writes one of his stories to take place in the Lovecraft universe. So it's totally a tribute to H.P. Lovecraft, and I loved that story. I ate it up because the whole time I'm going, oh, I know that. That's anyway. So yeah, just that list, we could go all day talking about all the ways that Lovecraft has influenced horror, and even the Evil Dead series. They read from the Necronomicon, and so it's the Necronomicon of the Mad Arab Abdul El-Hazrat in fiction, in modern cinema, and that has become, and Evil Dead became so influential that a lot of people thought that the Necronomicon was a real book and were trying to like get their hands on it and stuff. So which I'm sure somebody has made a Necronomicon book, but it's from Lovecraft.
Yeah, Avon made the Simon Necronomicon, which so Nico and I found out who was the actual author of the Simon Necronomicon, even though he says he didn't write it. But we know that that's not the real Necronomicon, because coming back to the Dunwich Horror, page 751 in the Necronomicon, well, the Avon book is like 300 pages long. So that could be the original Necronomicon.
Right.
Yeah.
Bound by human flesh.
Well, and then, another thing that I forgot that Nico had said about his influences, the Arabian Nights were such a huge influence on him. I don't think just for like place names and people, but some of his thoughts about so in Islam, Allah is this sovereign entity who, what he wants is good just because he says it's good. He's not
right.
Oh God, that it's kind of like that might makes right kind of thing. And you can read that into his ideas of what a God is. Like, it's just whatever I want. There's no concept of
right.
Father. There's no concept of self-sacrifice. And he even named the Necronomicon in Arabic. Its name is Al-Azif, which means like the howling. and one of the names for Allah in Arabic is Al-Aziz. So like it's very, very close together. But yeah, no, I just that came to mind after we had talked about that.
Absolutely. And you're totally spot on, because Islam does have a lot of, it's like just what you said. Islam is this religion centered around the idea that God is basically, this is good because God says it's good. They also have a picture of God where he's exhaustively sovereign over every single detail of the universe. So whereas like even the most hardcore like hyper Calvinist person will say that God decrees sins, but he doesn't want the sin to happen, kind of thing. In Islam, it's like, no, he actually wants the sin to happen. It actually brings him pleasure that some terrible event happens in the life of a person, because he decreed all things and he loves his decree. It's a really, really disturbing worldview, but you can completely see how that would influence somebody like H.P. Lovecraft, because if this is what a god is, and I'm a whatever that were, existentialist, where I'm kind of Nietzschean and I think that nothing matters anyway, then this idea of a god being just might makes right, it's like, of course that would be a really dark and evil entity. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. For the record, I also don't believe in the God H.P. Lovecraft doesn't believe in, because my God is not.
Right. Exactly. What since we're kind of talking about, you mentioned the thing about or we've mentioned Cthulhu as a false Christ, I was wondering what you would think about Randolph Carter as a sort of false saint, because Randolph Carter is really the only person who acquires the wisdom of the Lovecraft universe without going insane. And he forges, you mentioned Yog-Sothoth being the gate and the key. And that's a quote from the life of Randolph Carter, where he enters into the dream realm and he meets Yog-Sothoth. And Yog-Sothoth, of course, offers to teach him wisdom because he's the gate and the key. So I was wondering what you would think about that, like Randolph Carter, and Randolph Carter as the closest thing maybe to a saint in Lovecraft's mythology.
Yeah, so I could see it. I also I would be hesitant just because I really like the idea of insanity being his equivalent to Christian conversion. And so him being not insane kind of means like he didn't believe it. I almost see Randolph Carter as him kind of writing himself into the story, which I know that's exactly.
Yeah.
But him saying, I can deal with all these propositions and yet not be changed by them.
Right. Yeah, which of course we know that that's not true.
No, it's not.
He clearly was changed by them, because that's what he's writing.
That's exactly what he's
demonstrating
writing.
that he was changed by them. But it's the arrogance of man that we think that we can toy with these ideas and not be changed by it. We don't even understand that everybody else can see like, oh, he's really getting messed up here. Although, if I'm remembering correctly, doesn't Randolph Carter actually he does end up not going insane, but he does get lost, because there's that story where he gets trapped in the body of one of the pre-human creatures, and then he has to like go around the earth dressed up as a Hindu and wearing this turban thing to hide the like weird stuff on his head, and he's like wears robes so that he can hide that he's got these like pincers and stuff. And
that's the triangle being, right?
The triangle being, yes.
Yes, absolutely. I forgot about that. You're
so
right.
He does. he does end up, he doesn't go crazy, but he does end up kind of lost and trapped in this other body, which I can't remember how he gets out of that, or if he does. I think he gets out of it because of he's able to like go back to his childhood, but I might be connecting two stories that aren't directly connected. I don't know, but he no, that's just a fascinating thought to me. He's trying to get to read his own will as this like Hindu, and anyway, super creepy story, but yeah.
Waiting for this other being to send their mind back through time so you can get back home.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, that's well, and you know, another thing that really kind of ties Lovecraft in this, you know, the theosophy and the kind of popular religion of the day and the spiritualism is that God placed eternity in the heart of man, and so we know that we're not just here for a short time.
Right.
But instead of understanding that and looking to God, the creator of the universe, he kind of allowed his fear, this existentialism, to permeate all of the cosmos in his mind. And so instead of saying, you know, there's a God, he's good, he will protect us, it's kind of this Nietzschean, who will protect us now? And
Right.
there's nobody to protect us, and this is infinite, and it's always been here. And I just finished C.S. Lewis's Paralandra, and in it, you know, there's this point where Ransom is having these thoughts come into his head about like the true reality of the universe is death, and that life is only the rind on the edge of the fruit. And it's like, dude, I almost wish Lewis could just shake Lovecraft and be like, dude, you're misunderstanding everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I appreciate that you guys covered what I was about to mention. So we were talking about Lovecraft's inspiration and sources, but then you guys switched to how he has influenced the horror genre and the overall global culture. So I just want to mention to anyone who loves Lovecraft watching this episode, you know, thinking, you know, why are these guys so much criticizing his work? We're not. We're just dissecting and trying to see what is the context and what were his motives for writing the way he was writing.
Right.
But also we want to mention his accomplishments, and like the Bible says, we want to give the credit whom the credit is due. So I want to read one very interesting quote where Lovecraft was praised. It says that Lovecraft brings an existential worldview, one where mankind does not enjoy any special status in the great scheme of things. In Lovecraft's worldview, mankind has no intrinsic value, and the horrors encountered care nothing for our thoughts, works, or sins. We're simply so far below the attention of the universe and its inhabitants as to be absolutely insignificant. What Lovecraft accomplished is to remove mankind from the equation and relegate us to the same order of being as the ants below our feet. In doing so, Lovecraft profoundly changed our understanding of horror, removing forever man's hubris in imagining we're important or special in any way. I found this quotation from Quora website, but I also want to say, why is this quotation important? Someone may say, well, this is depressing. Well, the point is that he has altered horror genre throughout movies, TV shows, video games, novels, in any shape and form. He has changed horror genre, because before him, horror genre was more or less similar. We could see, you know, in all these works of fiction, you know, werewolves, vampires, things of that sort. But when Lovecraft comes, he brings different sort of horror. So when after his work, the future generations of people like Stephen King and many others, they were influenced by Lovecraft. So in their mind, they don't want to write all the same deja vu that that you know we've been having in our traditions. Every civilization has been having so many you know, similar stories of ghosts and demons and werewolves and shapeshifters, whatever. But then Lovecraft comes and he changes that. And because of him, we have one of my favorite TV shows, Stranger Things. I'm not saying that without him, Stranger Things wouldn't exist, but it wouldn't exist in the same shape and form. It will probably still be good, but would it be equally as good? I don't know. Maybe. We have Alien. We have the movie The Thing with that came out a few decades ago.
John
It's like one
Carpenter.
of the best sci-fi movies of all time. So, like, how can you not appreciate that? You don't have to agree with Lovecraft's material that was hopeless, but again, it comes from his childhood, so you cannot blame him too much for that, because he was writing from that perspective where everything was dark. You're just a little boy sitting there in the dark, you're crying, and no one can hear for your cry because there's no loving father to come and hug you and protect you from the evil and tell you everything will be okay. So I just want to, that I'm glad that you guys mentioned this already in advance. So, like, we have to credit him for being creative, for being for bringing all this diversity in his writings, like what he was doing. I mean, can you imagine also the pain he was going through? He had no family. I mean, he had wife after that, but life was miserable enough already. He didn't know how to vent his frustrations and this hopelessness. So writing books was his way out. Like, he was already going not okay in his mind. I don't want to say he was going mad, but that was his way of, in a way, maybe even healing, or like, let me share this with people before I go. Like, even though it was fiction, but that was where his heart was. So, I like, many times on our channel, I bring different guests, and I like when they say, hey, don't be afraid of reading fiction. It can be sci-fi, it can be fantasy, it can be horror, it can be playing video games, it can be watching those kind of movies and TV shows, it can be playing that kind of like board games. I've been interested recently in the Warhammer genre. I'm like, I want to buy some novels and learning more about these things. Some Christians are like, don't touch this, don't taste this, don't watch this. Everything is ungodly if it's secular. But no, you're bringing different kind of thinking, different type of guests who are open-minded, not open-minded to sin, no, but they're able to discern and see other things. Like, okay, even though these people may be atheists, or these people may be non-Christians, they may be, New Agers or different religious, but it's impossible that if someone writes a book like this guy, even though he's not a follower of Christ, it's impossible that her or his material contains zero truth. So I love when theologian says all the truth is God's truth. It doesn't matter who came up with mathematical equations or scientific discoveries or this or that. If it's true, it's God's truth. So we can learn and analyze, I think, Lovecraft's material. Yes, first to enjoy that creepy atmosphere, the same way I enjoy like listening to supposedly true eyewitness accounts on YouTube. I listen to stories of people who say, hey, I saw Mothman, hey, I saw Bigfoot, hey, I saw Dogman. And Shaun and I just did recently an episode just reading and commenting on one of those true event stories, and I really enjoy it. So in the same fashion, why not reading this, analyzing, and seeing like you guys saw so many biblical perspectives, like this is the Dark Messiah, this is the Ark of the Covenant, this is the coming Cthulhu is a form of dark Christ or Antichrist as a false prophet. So by reading this, I'm not saying that if you are a father or a mother and you allow kids to read these things, well, okay, it's not a kid, maybe a kid material, but let's say you're a young adult. That doesn't mean that kind of material will convert you into an atheist or make you a God hater. No, rather it can open your mind to think critically. And when you're dealing in the future on the college campus or at your work or academia or wherever, where you're dealing with some material that is opposing Christianity, if you're well read with classics and with fantasy authors, you can be better prepared to defend your faith and to understand what is the motive that these people are coming with their writings, or professors who are pushing certain atheistic dogma. You can be well prepared and have peace that this is not disturbing your Christian waters, so to speak. So you can swim freely knowing that you're rooted in Christ. And fictional authors, or authors who are not fictional, but if they're even strongly anti-biblical, they cannot do any harm to you, because you didn't live just in your little bubble, just reading the Bible your whole life. You didn't read the history, you didn't read the church fathers, you didn't read Tolkien, you didn't read Lovecraft, you didn't read anything, because maybe you grew up in a very fundamentalist family where everything was dark and black and sinister. don't you dare listen to that, don't you dare watch this. And now you have fear and you know nothing. You're not prepared to go in the world because you lived in your little bubble. So I just appreciate how, you guys, in the same fashion, when I had a number of other guests, they're all open-minded, again, not to sinful things, but they're open to see these things and analyze them and have peace about it. Like, yeah, it's fine. Of course, you're not going to like agree with authors when it comes to something that is clearly anti-biblical. So if you guys want to expand on this for a couple minutes, it's fine. If not, I can go further. It's up to you.
Well, yeah, go ahead, Shaun.
Okay. So just as you were saying, something returned to my mind. Lovecraft, it definitely wasn't his fault. None of the things that happened to him were his fault. He literally had no control over any of that. His father was taken from him at a young age. His mother, after his grandfather's passing, became very mentally unstable. They had a very codependent relationship. He was living with the definition of a smothering mother, or a devouring mother that Jordan Peterson talks about. He had to get away from his mom, and so he moved in with with his aunts, and they despised him. He got married to get away from them. During the Depression, his wife, who had a hat business, that business failed. In order for them to be able to survive, she moved in with her parents, and he got an apartment in New York, in the very bad area of New York. And this is where he was exposed to immigrants. And this, with him and his racism, that was not a good fit. So he wrote back to his aunts. It was like, hey, can I move back with you? And they said, yes, under one condition. You can never see your wife again, because they hated her. And so he had to take that. He loved his wife, but he would never see her again for the rest of his life. He moved back in with his aunts, and the wealthier of the aunts ended up dying, left everything to her kids, and him and his other aunt lived penniless for the last years of his life. That's why towards the end of his life, he was writing short stories, just real punchy. Because before, you had something like Mountains of Madness, where you would have, each chapter would be in a magazine. But he needed more money. He had no income. So this was his life. He had no father to protect him. So how could he trust in a holy father when he never had a father to protect him? There never was guidance. He was on his own this entire time, and he was around these people who despised him. He had a devouring mother who wanted to always control him. He didn't really have any friends. He didn't really believe in himself. This man was left just without an option, man. And what he created, the universe that he created, really captured the zeitgeist of the 20th century. Everything is meaningless. There is no purpose. And he kind of has Neil deGrasse Tyson's eschatology, where he says we are 2% distinct from chimpanzees. Imagine something that's 2% distinct from us, in the direction that we are 2% distinct from chimpanzees. And what will they do to us when they encounter us? And you have the great old ones.
Mm-hmm.
Lovecraft was able to encompass everything the 20th century was trying to say to us.
Exactly. And to kind of round out what you had said about Lovecraft's influence, if you are a person like me who appreciates horror as a genre and likes to watch horror movies and read horror books, there are books not directly influenced by Lovecraft that still benefit greatly from him. So the scariest book of all time, it's still awarded constantly, called the scariest book of all time, is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. And that book doesn't have any direct influence from H.P. Lovecraft. However, the style in which that book is written is not the style in which pre-Lovecraft horror was written. In pre-Lovecraftian horror, what you have is usually some kind of escape for the reader. So what I mean by that is not that there's some kind of escape in the story, but there's an escape for the reader that the author is going to constantly throughout the story, they'll give you these little glimpses of abject terror, but they'll constantly kind of give you a little bit of pillows and buffering so that you never have to feel truly afraid. My favorite example of this is Dracula. If you actually think about what Dracula is, you'll be terrified. The idea that a horrifying creature like Dracula is also this wealthy count who can do whatever he wants in the world. It's like if Elon Musk was a vampire, he can do whatever he wants, and he consumes human blood and destroys people and doesn't think twice about it. The whole concept is frightening and horrifying, but Bram Stoker writes the book in such a way that he keeps inculcating kind of humor and fun and making it so that you never have to really be terrified by Dracula. Lovecraft was, in a lot of ways, the first horror author to not give you that escape. He confronts you with terrifying concepts, and when you try to look away, he says, no, look at it. It's frightening. I want you to see that. And I think horror has benefited greatly from that, because the truth is that William Peter Blatty is able to explore the demonic and demonic possession from a perspective that it is actually scary, and you should actually be frightened by what you're seeing. But praise God, Christ conquers. Praise God that you can overcome these things. But when you look them in the face, you should be afraid of them. You should not be looking at the demonic realm and saying, yeah, but there's an out. No, because in the real world, we have to face our fears. And in the real world, we have to actually experience that fear. There is no pillow. There is no, you can't just hide under the blanket. You have to actually deal with the fear. And if horror doesn't give us that, then what's the point of horror? The beauty of horror is that it allows us to examine the terror of living in a fallen world so that we can learn how to overcome it in Christ. And so if, I guess just to kind of conclude that point, even if you just appreciate, Japanese horror like Ringu or Ju-on the Grudge or any of those kinds of horror movies where it is truly terrifying from beginning to end and it has you at the edge of your seat, you can thank H.P. Lovecraft, because even though The Ring and Ju-on the Grudge has no direct influence from Lovecraft, just the fact that we are in some sense allowed to tell truly terrifying stories from a truly terrifying perspective, we have him to thank, at least for the fact that that's popularized. And I think for the fact that that even exists, because prior to him, that was really not a thing people did. And after him, it's the default way horror is done. And I think that that's a good thing. I think horror should be that way for the exact reasons I said. So I really appreciate Lovecraft for that reason alone.
Do you think that part of the reason that he was able to do that, or maybe not able to do that, do you think maybe some of the reason that he wrote that way was because he didn't have that break? He didn't have that relief. There was no pillow for him. And instead of saying, I'm going to transport you into another world, he says, "Come and look at my world. Come
Yeah.
and look at my world through my eyes and experience the terror." Like what you were talking about with Bram Stoker. I don't know if Lovecraft had the capacity to do something like that. Had the when I think of Lovecraft, I think of a death metal Sheldon Cooper. Like
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. He even kind of looks like that.
and the fact that his wife had to teach him how to be intimate because he had no propensity for intimacy. So yeah. So yeah, I wonder if because Lewis kind of says that for someone to copy, anybody can copy, but innovation is proper to genius. So
right.
The fact that he was the first one to do it, that shows the genius of Lovecraft. But I wonder if the impetus for that was, I look at how terrible life is for a lot of people, not just him. And maybe the irony with him being racist is that part of this living in a universe where these powers, you don't understand these powers that are over you. He actually is almost telling the story of the immigrant, where to this country that there's all these powers that they have no idea where they come from or what they're doing, but they know that they have authority over them.
Oh, I love that.
I think we came to the last segment of at least for today. We may continue in the future. I want to read how Lovecraft has, of course, unintentionally and unknowingly, much later in his life and after his death, he has influenced some of the crazy theories, including one religion. So I want to just read some of the quotations and get again from the scholar Colavito, and you guys can expound. So 2 theories that he influenced, again, unknowingly. The first one is the ancient astronaut theory, and the second one is, unfortunately, Scientology. So let's read one of the quotations when it comes to the ancient astronaut theory. One of the most dramatic ideas found in H.P. Lovecraft's weird fiction known as Cthulhu mythos is the suggestion that the extraterrestrial beings arrived on Earth in the distant past. They were responsible for ancient works of monumental stone architecture and inspired mankind's earliest mythologies and religions. In the 1970s, this basic premise was resurrected as the ancient astronaut theory, a fringe hypothesis that gained widespread popularity thanks to Swiss author Erich von Daniken's book Chariot of the Gods. It was also accepted throughout this time that this author was a correspondent of Lovecraft, right? No letters survive to this day, unfortunately. And both he and some other authors who are called the fathers of the modern ancient astronaut theory, which they wrote about in the book called The Morning of the Magicians in the 1960s, they translated and published the first French editions of the Lovecraft's work. Again, this is from Colavito. So again, unintentionally, because we have to give another credit to Lovecraft. Lovecraft was an atheist, but he also wasn't trying to invent anything. He was, besides his mythos. So we'll see later how he's influenced Scientology. Again, he wasn't trying to invent a religion. He wasn't trying to invent any of those things. He admits, and I like his sincerity, like, he doesn't believe in supernatural, not just when it comes to Christianity. He doesn't believe in supernatural when it comes to the other stuff. So it can be occult, New Age, other religions, doesn't matter. He was just creating his fictional mythos, and that's fine, just the same way Tolkien was doing, or C.S. Lewis, right? That's fine. So he didn't believe and did not intend for his mythological fictional work to influence others. Yet, throughout the history in the last century, we see how what he was writing, authors who came after him translated his work, especially in this case, it was in French. And this couple of gentlemen, I don't know how to pronounce their French names. One was Bergier, and another one was Powell. It's not Powell because it's spelled differently. again, they're the fathers of modern ancient astronaut theory. They read Lovecraft, and even though they know it's fiction, I don't know if they thought that somehow he received some information, revelation from the other side that, I don't know, that inspired him to write. But that inspired them in their further work to come up with this ancient astronaut theory, and it has inevitably found some of the sources in Lovecraft. Again, even though he didn't want to do that. So, like, what do we do with this information?
Shaun, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah. Well, I would say that, first of all, ancient astronaut theory, in my mind, is exactly what the character Screwtape was thinking of when he told Wormwood, I hope someday that we can reveal ourselves to the humans without any idea of spirituality attached to it. So that way there's no chance that they will look for our enemy, which would be God, by seeing us. So I think that's exactly what Screwtape was thinking about. And interestingly, I think Lewis was writing that around the same time that Lovecraft was writing his stuff. But when Lovecraft was writing, basically nobody really knew who he was. Derleth was the one who paid for it to be translated into French, and because the French loved Poe so much, they instantly took that up, and it didn't really become popular again in America until the 60s and 70s. But yeah, I definitely ancient aliens, that if you remove the idea that they're from other planets and you understand that they're demons, I think you can just understand, yeah, all the ancient alien stuff, probably true. Did the demons help people do things? Yep. Absolutely guarantee that they did. Did they teach them weird technologies? Yeah, the Book of Enoch says that they showed them all kinds of stuff. Yeah, ancient astronaut theory is just a polysyllabic way of saying demons.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely true. There's a gentleman at my church who's a historian, and he said he likes to watch Ancient Aliens because he feels like it's really the only show on the History Channel that tells true history. But you have to sort of separate from the fact that they're ascribing all this stuff to aliens. But if you do that, then yeah, it's actually not bad history. And I can see where they draw influence from Lovecraft. I think it's interesting that you said like it's an unintentional influence. And I think it is, but I also think that it's intentional on their part in the sense that I don't really think these are honest people coming to these conclusions in honest ways. So I think that they draw from the popularity of Lovecraft and they're like, hey, if people like these as stories, what if we told them it was true? And then how much money could we make if we turned this into a religion?
It was aliens. That's the answer to everything. It was aliens. Pyramids, aliens. How we came to be, aliens. Everything, aliens. Nephilim, aliens. Shapeshifters, aliens. Everything.
Everything is aliens. Oh, but yeah, I mean it's fascinating, and it is a strange worldview to take, and it's very materialistic. And I think your point about Screwtape is awesome. I think that's exactly what Ancient Aliens is. And again, I've talked about this on my YouTube channel because I like to talk about weird stuff and where weird stuff intersects with Christianity. And one of the things I've talked about is the fact that I truly believe that all of these, anything that's real in the experience of alien abductions is demonic. And you can see that because if you look at, texts from ancient times or the Middle Ages and how they describe demonic manifestations, it's really similar to stories about alien encounters. And also another thing that a lot of people don't know is the similarity between alien encounters and people's encounters with fairies. So, like, for example, what do fairies do? Well, they usually find children, and then you're in the woods, and then you encounter this entity that says, "Hey, come on, come to my house." And then you're in this strange place surrounded by things that are totally foreign to you. You're unable to move. Maybe there's somebody experimenting on you. They wouldn't say experimenting, but there's somebody like, touching you in weird ways. There's somebody doing weird stuff to you, and then they give you some kind of weird food. You eat it, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're back on Earth, and you're back in the world you came from. It's the same sort of thing people say about alien abduction. They're frozen in place. They're in a strange place surrounded by things they've never seen before. The only difference between fairy encounters and alien encounters is that fairy encounters are explained with magic and alien encounters are explained as technology. So where fairy encounters, you're in like some kind of bizarre hut that doesn't look quite right. In alien encounters, you're in some kind of bizarre metal sphere that doesn't look quite right. Either way, it's the same kind of concept. You're in a very exceedingly foreign environment with semi-human entities doing bizarre things to you, whether that's sticking probes into you or whether that's, touching you with objects, whatever it is, whether it's fairies or aliens, they're doing the same thing. And if you think about it, even the description of these things is kind of similar. Aliens are little tiny gray men or green men, depending on what era it is, but they're little tiny men who walk around naked and, talk to you through their mind. Fairies are little tiny men who walk around naked and talk to you through their mind. So it's like, all of these kinds of things have really dramatic similarities. And one of the first ever alien encounters, or one of the first ever what today people call UFO encounters, was actually originally reported as a ghost story, not an alien encounter. And it was only like 20 years later that the children involved, when their father was marketing it, he started marketing it as an alien encounter because that was way more popular in the 50s than ghost stories. So he started marketing it that way. But when it was originally told, it was told as a ghost story. So all that is to say that I completely agree with Shaun. And I also believe that 100% Screwtape was spot on in that this is exactly what demons are actively doing, and it's a demonic deception that is being presented to people as an attempt by demonic entities to deceive us into either I don't know fully what their goal is, but I assume that it involves pulling us away from God to either worship them, or I think through artificial intelligence, there could potentially be some sort of effort to bring them into a kind of physical existence, because we see that in a lot of ancient texts that this is what Nephilim are. They're demonic entities' effort at uniting themselves to the physical world in some way. And so I would not be at all surprised if different AI programs are the exact same thing repeating itself. And we even named one of the biggest AI programs Moloch. So tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, and just to back you up on the aliens and fairies thing, fairies were very prominent across Eurasia until Christendom came in. And then where you see Christ, these things kind of begin to flee, and then they're recounted as stories or fairy tales. So where Christendom takes dominion, the principalities and powers have to leave. As we live in a post-Christian age, we start now seeing these things come in this other form of technology. I can't remember who the author is that said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. It sounds Joseph Campbell, maybe. But somebody like that said, you know, and there's a lot of truth to that. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think the ancient aliens guys would make that exact same point, that what they thought was magic was probably technology. Mm-hmm. And what we think of as technology is probably demonic magic.
And they're not 100% wrong, right? Like the Book of Enoch talks about that. Like the same entities that taught us how to do, you know, certain acts of metallurgy were also behind teaching us witchcraft. So there's a bizarre, I mean, even like the Book of Enoch says that says that Azazel taught mankind how to practice making of excellent weaponry, but he also taught them how to beautify themselves with makeup. It's like those two things seem totally different, but they're ascribed to the same entity. So definitely.
Well, you've got the weapons of men and the weapons of women.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's awesome. I never thought about that before.
Okay, let me just please read this quote when it comes to Scientology. As some noted, Scientology and Lovecraft share eerie parallels. Lovecraft's fictional extraterrestrials came to Earth in the distant past and had a profound and largely dark influence on early humanity, and this idea bears a resemblance to Operation Thetan Level 3, the supposedly non-fictional cosmological doctrine L. Ron Hubbard created circa 1967 for Scientology. Again, this is from Jason Colavito. There are some superficial similarities between Lovecraft's and Hubbard's vision of our alien past. Both wrote that extraterrestrials came to Earth tens of millions of years ago, and both wrote that Earth had been a part of a galactic system of inhabited worlds before a cataclysm caused the aliens to retreat. Both authors also wrote about buried evidence of alien civilizations. According to David G. Bromley and Mitchell L. Bracey Jr., the official Scientology doctrine is that the dead Hubbard lives on in a bodiless form, researching spirituality on another planet, just as Randolph Carter's mind visits the cosmic oneness that is Yog Sothoth and studies magic in the body of a wizard on the planet Yadith. Similarly, the Scientology Thetans are also disembodied spirits who persist from age to age like the roving minds of the great race. In both Lovecraft's and Hubbard's conceptions, this idea derives from 19th century occult ideas of astral projection. However, and Al Colavito also defends Lovecraft. He says, however, Lovecraft and Hubbard greatly differed in the way that the former one, Lovecraft, did not want to create a religion that people would take seriously. The materialist atheist Lovecraft shy about declaiming the falsity of his fake gods. Now, this is what Lovecraft says. Regarding the dreaded Necronomicon of the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, I must confess that both the evil volume and the accursed author are fictitious creatures of my own. They're malign entities of Azoth, Yog-Sothoth, I can't pronounce all these entities, and they're inventions of Clark Ashton Smith, while Friedrich von Junst and his monstrous Unaspechlichen Kulten originated in the fertile brain of Robert E. Howard. I think that Robert E. Howard created Conan, right? Yes. I love Conan, right? For the fun of building up a convincing cycle of synthetic folklore, all of our gang, meaning all his authors, all his friends who were like authors and writers, they frequently alluded to the pet demons of others. Thus, Smith uses my Yog Sothoth while I use his Sahagotua or Sagothra, something like that. Also, I sometimes insert a devil or two of my own in the tales I revise or ghostwrite for professional clients. Thus, our Black Pantheon acquires an extensive publicity and pseudo-authoritative, I can't pronounce this, but basically he's giving a pseudo authority to all his writings and names that otherwise it would not get. We never, however, tried to put it across as an actual hoax, but always carefully explain to everyone that this is 100% fiction. So again, you may not like Lovecraft for some stuff. You can blame him for this thing or not. But also, I like how honest he was. He was like, "Hey, I'm just writing fiction. I don't believe in any of this. I didn't create an Necronomicon. I invented some things and I put it there. And as a ghostwriter, and my friends, my pals, helped me to promote some names as almost this mythology is true. But I never planned to plant the seed of as if somehow this is true." And on the other side, Scientology did that. So they're like trying, even though there's some similarities, they're like also their approach and their motives of their heart seem to be completely different. So before I mention this booklet about the true Samoan and Pacific Island mythology that resembles Cthulhu, I just want to ask you guys if you want to comment on these differences and similarities between Lovecraft and Scientology.
Yeah. So when Kevin was talking about the aliens, actually, like, oh, it's cool because they're cool. Like, I was thinking about Thetans at that point, and Lovecraft, he was like, yeah, when the stars are right, these things will move between planets. Hubbard was like, Golden 747 into the volcano. That's how you get demons. Like, dude, that's ridiculous. And then, instead of the Necronomicon, Lovecraft is like Necronomicon. It's a work of fiction. Hubbard is like Dianetics. Trust me, bro. Like, terrible. Yeah, that's the difference between somebody who's writing for money. Lovecraft was writing for money, and he was honest with his, he loved his audience, versus Hubbard, who is writing for money, and he knows he's cheating people.
Right. Exactly. I think Scientology is perhaps even less valuable than, or I mean, even less sort of on. I described Ancient Aliens as being dishonest. I think Scientology is even less honest, has even less actual value. It smacks of being completely made up. L. Ron Hubbard was famously a science fiction writer before he created Scientology. So basically, it seems like he just figured out that his writing wasn't good enough to be best-selling writing, but if he could turn it into a stupid religion for rich people, then he could become a millionaire without selling very many books. So that's what he did. He created a bizarre religion for wealthy people. Originally, it was mostly for wealthy white people. Now they're more open to. Actually, now they've sort of partnered with the Nation of Islam. A lot of people don't know that what's his name? Farrakhan is really connected with Scientology now in a bizarre kind of partnership of doom. But in any case, I don't know how long Scientology can realistically last in the world. They don't have very many members. They're not really influential in anything. They make a lot of noise because they're so wealthy, but they have no real. There's no real value to Scientology. There's no real impetus to establish it anywhere. So, but yes, I think it is probably highly influenced by Lovecraft. I think it seems like there's a lot of similar themes between Hubbard and Lovecraft. And let's be honest, somebody willing to make up lies and make up his own false religion just to try to turn a profit is probably not above plagiarism. So the idea that he gets a lot of his ideas from Lovecraft doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
Well, and the way that they have so much money is the members have to like buy subscriptions, then they have to pay for classes, then they recruit people. It's like the cult of Amway, and then dude, Hubbard's like, I suck at fiction. Let me try my hand at scripture. Like,
Oh.
yeah, dude, this dude just so much confidence. He has all the
Like, I'm not good enough to create novels, but I am good enough to create false religion.
yeah. This sucks so much it's inspired.
Oh. I think the only reason why people get into Scientology is just like the same sort of thing. It's like a gym membership, you know. It's like just being part of a club. I just want to be involved.
It's like a Universalist Unitarian church. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's like a much more expensive Universalist Unitarian church. And they've got to hold these little cans. It's just,
Yeah.
oh, it's so.
Okay, for the end, for the last part of this last segment, I just want to read something from this book, which is only on 40 pages. And unlike the first book, and I'll post Amazon links for both books. Unlike the first book, I don't really recommend buying this book because it's only 40 pages. There are 5 essays of this Pacific Island Samoan old cult of this water entity that is like Octopus. So it's like resembling Cthulhu, and it's real. It's not fictitious. It's like 5 short old stories of missionaries and people who went there and describe certain things. It's short and it's not worth that much of your time and money. Again, it's not expensive. I bought it so I can research. I expected more. And what is actually the most useful in this book is the introduction and the last 2 chapters. So I'm going to read something so we can learn that even though Lovecraft has completely invented these things, and I don't think he heard about what was happening in Samoa. I just want to say how sometimes the craziest work of fiction can parallel and match perfectly reality, and I love that. Okay, so this is introduction again and it's the same author, Jason Colavito, from the book The House of the Octopus. Okay. In The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, H.P. Lovecraft described a global cult that worshipped the octopus-headed extraterrestrial god Cthulhu, his minions, and the megalithic undersea sea in the Pacific where they rested dead, but dreaming until the day of Cthulhu's glorious resurrection. And now he's quoting a part from the novel. I'll skip that. While Lovecraft's undersea monster drew on a number of mythic sources, surprisingly and unknown to Lovecraft, there was a real religion in the Pacific that reproduced with uncanny accuracy the major details of the Cthulhu myth as given in the story. One of the most intriguing of Pacific deities was the Samoan god Fe, and it has 2 S, so F-E-E. He's equivalent to the Tongan god called Fiki, F-E-K-A, who had a second name is Tutula, T-U-T-U-L-A, the god of violence, who lived in a stone palace under the sea and had the form of a giant octopus. This god also had a megalithic stone temple in Samoa, and it was thought that he incarnated as an octopus. When these incarnations died, they were buried in his temple to be reborn in his undersea palace. I found this super interesting. The Fe's megalithic temple, as Samoa was called Fale Ole Fe, or the House of the Octopus. And in Lovecraft's day, it was believed to be the fabulously ancient work of a lost civilization, though today we know it is only a few centuries old. Just as Cthulhu was said to bring madness to his followers, the followers of Fe prayed to him for the blind madness of red rage. The following essays report the legend of the Fe through the eyes of the British consul in Samoa, William B. Churchward, and the scholar missionaries George Turner, John B. Stair, and E.E.V. Colocott. He said, this is all true. So I just want to read the beginning of chapter 4 because, again, Absolutely. It reminds me so much of the Bible and the Book of Enoch, which you guys mentioned. Chapter 4. As every settlement has its local god or war in addition to the national war gods, so every family has its own particular aitu or tutelary deity who was usually considered to inhabit some familiar object. Very divine council worldview, right?
Yeah.
One family supposed their god to possess a shark, another some bird or a stone, and another a reptile. Thus, a great variety of objects, animate and inanimate, were reverenced by the Samoans. And then, in the way that I mentioned, the Book of Enoch is they had this place of that was not just paradise, but also Hades, and they had their version of Tartarus, where which was called a dread place of punishment, where these all these entities and beings will be put, I guess, to punishment. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much like Dr. Heise's work, and this is so much like the Book of Enoch. So like they had their own local gods, they had their own national gods. They had this octopus that would die and resurrect, that would live in an underwater palace. And this is true. It's recorded by Christian missionaries from, I don't know, 100 years ago or so. So I just want to, I don't know how Colavito found this, but I salute him for compiling this in a short booklet. Again, I do not recommend so much buying because there's not so much useful information. But I just want to read how, sometimes we may enjoy the work of fiction, not knowing that in real life there was something similar happening that could be even weirder than the work of fiction, but there was something demonic and spiritual happening far away from us, and people believed in these things. There's in the
Right.
first story, there is an example how missionaries went to investigate this place of the ruins of this so-called deity. And when they were about to camp and spend the night, the natives told this guy, hey, don't spend the night here because we don't want to provoke this deity. It may come from the water and kill us. They're like that. Let's go a little bit above. Let's go to the higher level. And in the nighttime, it was raining so much that the water level started going up. So the guy woke up. He was like, "What's happening? Like, I'm glad I listened to them. That we didn't spend the night over there because we could have drowned." And I'm like, could there be something in their warning, as if they knew that something demonic would come after them? Again, we don't know, but it's so interesting. So the floor is yours before we give some concluding thoughts. So what do you think about these stories and this Samoan pagan religion that used to believe in a similar god that Lovecraft was depicting?
I think it's surprising if Lovecraft didn't know about this because it is very similar, but also because if you read Call of Cthulhu, he places the adherents of Cthulhu's cult in the Pacific Islands, which is where Samoa is. So, and he even talks about like the anyway, there's like a Creole cult that the detective ends up coming across, and they're all Pacific Island folk. I think Lovecraft describes them using a not so good word, but it doesn't matter. The point is that they're people from that part of the world. So it seems like maybe Lovecraft had somehow heard that something like this was believed by somebody, but I mean, just the striking similarities there, and the fact that even like they pray for madness to overtake them, and how fitting that Cthulhu would be similar to a god of war. it's all just like right there, but that's really all I have to say about that. I mean, I just find it fascinating. If Lovecraft didn't know about it, then it's somehow even more fascinating.
I would say demons are not very creative. They're very powerful, not very creative. So
Fair enough.
We would expect to see some truth somewhere. I mean, I don't believe that all. So Lovecraft suffered from nightmares and night terrors and all kinds of visions and hallucinations. So I think that he was under pretty strong demonic attack. I don't believe that all of these were just the works of his mind. Now his stories were obviously his works of genius, but the creatures, I think that these were things that were either communicated to him through the demonic attacks, or just him making some sort of like archetypical personification of the forces of fear and dread. So, but yeah, I think that there was definitely demonic influence somewhere in there, and definitely demonic influence in the Samoans. So that's yeah, demons do demon stuff.
Right. I would totally agree. I would also point out that almost all cultures have some concept. Shaun is spot on. Almost all cultures have some concept of a kraken-like figure. The kraken is the most famous one in the West because of the Greek influence, but almost all cultures, the Israelites had the concept of the Lilith, or the Lilitu is the woman spirit. The Leviathan, or in Hebrew, it's actually Lotan. But they have the concept of the Leviathan, which is essentially the same thing. It's a water demon. Usually, water demons are associated with chaotic forces, and that's because just from a pragmatic thought process, the ocean is an extremely chaotic place that's highly unwelcoming to human beings. So it makes sense that any spiritual entities that were associated with the ocean would immediately have the connotation of being quite frightening and chaotic in nature. But also, if you're coming from a Christian perspective, I think we can rightly say that it's also true that the spirits associated with the ocean really are chaotic and evil spirits. And by the way, in a Christian perspective, chaos is inherent. Evil is inherently chaos. So, because God didn't create the world to be chaotic, God created the world to be ordered. And it's really sin that causes chaos to exist. So the fact that things are chaotic is actually a bad thing from a Christian perspective. So it should not surprise us at all that the chaotic forces in the universe are evil forces. And so, the fact that, like Shaun said, the fact that demonic entities would sort of teach people to worship them as chaotic, disturbing, disgusting forces of the ocean kind of makes sense. And there's also one other thing that I wanted to mention is the prevalence of dragons in mythology. Those are also usually, or at least there's a kind of dragon that's almost always seen in every culture's mythology that is a sea spirit and is a chaotic agent. And they hang out in oceans, lakes, and places like that. So since this is such a prevalent mythology, it actually makes sense that, like, even if Lovecraft didn't know about the specific stories of the Samoans, like Shaun was saying, demons aren't creative. Their stories are pretty similar. So even if Lovecraft just knew about, like, the Kraken mythos, any inspiration he drew from that would probably seem very similar to things demons were actually. So I'm not saying that Lovecraft was inspired by demons, although I think Shaun makes a good point there. But I'm saying that even if you aren't ready to say, yeah, demons are influencing this guy's work, if you just believe that demons exist and are active in the world, then it seems to make a lot of sense that, given how similarly these demons have interacted with so many different cultures, Lovecraft doesn't have to be familiar with this one in order to come to that. So I'm glad you pointed that out, Shaun. That definitely makes a lot of sense.
And if we can connect those things, the octopus, the Cthulhu, and the Leviathan, I think we get to this monster, the sea monster of chaos, which we know that we win because Job says that Leviathan is like God's pet. So
yes,
yeah, he may be an enemy to us, but he's not an enemy to God.
Right.
And will be served as a dinner in the eschaton to the Christians. So we will actually devour the enemy. That's
Nope.
amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add one sentence to what Kevin said. You're right. In the Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft does mention that the old ones came to the Pacific area where they came and this. Well, I can say, even though Lovecraft doesn't say, but they deceived the people to worship them and establish the cult. So yeah, if his mythos was in Pacific and then there are Samoans in the Pacific worshiping, who knows, even though they don't have internet and all these sources we have today, but they still had libraries. So who knows, maybe he heard stories or read something that just brought another glimpse or another percentage to the overall inspiration. But brothers, friends, gentlemen, I want to thank you for going for 2 hours and 17 minutes. I'm thankful for your expertise. I'm thankful for your knowledge. I'm thankful for all the data and info you gave us. I enjoyed so much. I learned so much. Now I'm like anticipating to read some of his stuff because I watched some movies. I played some games in the past. I want to buy some of his inspired board games and enjoy more in his universe. But I cannot say that I have read his novels. So now I'm inspired to want to read. But I just want to give the concluding thoughts to you. Whatever you think that was important that you wanted to mention but forgot, you can remember. If you remember, you can mention now, or if you have any goodbye messages for the audience when it comes to Christianity and Lovecraft's universe, you can mention now.
Okay, I'll go first, so that way Kevin gets the last word. Christ is king, death is defeated, and we will rule over Leviathan. There will be no more sea. In heaven, the forces of chaos will be defeated and thrown down, and we will rule and reign with Christ. All right, Kevin, your turn.
Well, that's basically all I was going to say is just, the reason why I love Lovecraft so much and the reason why I always find myself coming back to Lovecraft is because of what I had said initially, which is that Lovecraft is the complete antithesis to my Christian worldview. And I love studying it because for me, Lovecraft shows me exactly why we need to engage with this culture and bring this culture that says there is no hope, there is no God, there is no reality, there's nothing good, truth is whatever you make it. That culture has a dark side, and that dark side is Lovecraft, which says there's no hope, there's nothing good in the world, there's nothing good or bad, really, it's all just meaningless, and it will all just cease to exist someday. And we can speak to that culture and say, no, God has conquered. Death is overthrown. Death will not get the last word. And Christ is King. Christ is Lord. And he's overthrown the power of death by his death. And by his resurrection, he has enabled each and every one of us to partake of the reality of his justification. So I guess what I would say is, if you are watching this, and thank you so much for sticking with us for 2 hours and 20 minutes now of us just having fun, because this is just fun to talk about. And so I appreciate you being here. But if you're here and you're not a Christian, then all I'll say is come and see. Come and see for yourself what it's like to have a worldview where death is overthrown, Christ is king, and you can truly enjoy things like the Cthulhu mythos, truly enjoy things like Lovecraft's fiction, not because you're afraid of it. I mean, it's scary, but you're not afraid of the idea of hopelessness because you know that hopelessness has been defeated and overthrown, and chaos will be no more. There will come a day where, like he said, there will be no more sea, there will be no more chaos, and all these evil entities will be gone, and we will reign with Christ in an ordered, perfect universe. And you can be a part of that by repenting and coming to Jesus today.
I'm glad in a way we're done, but I'm also like, there's always so much more you want to say. Like I had notes about Necronomic, and I wanted to analyze further, his work and actually, dissect.
There can
someone,
always be a
work
part
more.
2.
Yes. So I'm like, okay, but this happens with so many guests and with so many episodes. We always go more than we plan, and we almost never cover everything from the outline. I'm like, and I always think in the beginning, like, oh my gosh, will I have enough material? And I'm like, I'm overdoing it. So it's like so fun, but also I'm learning so much from my guests, and that's my goal. That's my desire. I'm like, I did create this ministry podcast, but I'm like less important than my guests. I always want to learn from people who know more. It makes me so excited. So, gentlemen, I thank you for your time. You can stick out even when we are done with the podcast, so we can just exchange some words for 5 minutes. I also want to invite everyone to if you consider this material to be beneficial to you for your growth, for your spiritual walk with God, not just this episode but the overall channel, or if you consider that it is helpful when it comes to some theological nerdy when it comes to the material that may be beneficial to your understanding of the horror genre, sci-fi, fantasy, I would just encourage you all to subscribe, to share the material, also support the work of Jason Colavito, whose book I will post. Find Kevin Hughes and his podcast, support him, subscribe, and just enjoy the work of fiction, love the Lord, seek the truth, and have a blessed and amazing weekend, all of you. Thank you. God bless. Take care.